Good morning, welcome to the Daily Tanya. Today is Tuesday, the 24th day of Sivan. Let's begin with tzedakah. Gedola tzedakah, shemekareves es hageula. Tzedakah brings Mashiach closer. We continue chapter 7, the long chapter that talks about the deep concepts in Hasidus, godly philosophy, to understand godliness as much as humanly possible. And yesterday we talked about not to take literally the concept of tzimtzum, contraction, the concept of God's contracting his light is not literal, that Hashem really is here. And only the contraction was from our perspective that we should be able to see and to exist as separate entities. That was the contraction for our perspective. And Alter Rebbe goes on now to explain that indeed that Hashem fills the world and encompasses the world, all of the world, the spiritual world, the physical world. There is the two levels of godliness. There is that level of godliness that is encompassing the world, meaning that it exists in a way that it's too intense to be in each and every creature. It is just in an encompassing way. And then you have the level of godliness that is called Memale Kol Almin, that fills each and every creature, each and every created being, according to its needs. That is the individual energy that goes individually, and that is why it follows what we explained, that the tzimtzum, the contraction, is not literal. Unlike other sages who said that the contraction was literal, meaning Hashem just has the watching from a distance, watching over the world. This Alter Rebbe said that this is false. There shouldn't be. It's a mistake to think that way, because Hashem being here, Hashem knows us and watches over us. It is by Him being here. It's not Hashem and His knowledge are not two separate entities. So in one way, we exist because Hashem makes us exist. Otherwise, we're not a real existence. Perhaps we can use one example, a metaphor, to understand a little bit the concept. Imagine a writer writes a novel, and in his writing, and he's planning the story that he writes. In his imagination, he creates all kinds of characters, and the characters they exist within his imagination, with his thoughts, his mind. They exist there, but they only exist because he makes them exist, because he thinks of them. Hashem's thinking of us is making us. So let's see inside where the Alter Rebbe explains this. The Alter Rebbe, Vezeu gam kein inyan sovev kol almin. And this is also the meaning of He encompasses all worlds. This doesn't mean to say, heaven forfend, that God is not found within the world, but merely encompasses them. What does it mean? So he brings an example of when a person thinks of something, an idea in your intellect, or a physical object you think in your thought, So you can say that your mind and your intellect and your thoughts encompasses the object or the idea that you think of. So that's what he says, Pirush derech mashal. This means by way of analogy. When a person reflects, he reflects upon an intellectual subject in his mind, or upon a physical object in his thought. Azai, sichloi, umachshavtoi, makrifim ala davar ahu mitzuya v'machshavtoi sichloi. Then this intellect and thought encompasses the subject. That subject whose image is formed in his thought or in his mind, inasmuch as they are found within his thought and mind. So the idea or the object that is in your mind, it's like we can say it's in your mind. But is it really in your mind? Is it physically in your mind? Obviously not. It's not really in your mind. You're just encompassing it in theory. But they, the intellect and thought, they do not encompass that subject in actual fact. They merely encompass his image, the image of the subject, not the actual subject. When one envisions a table, the actual physical table is, of course, not found within his brain. It is merely its image that is encompassed there, the image of the object that you think of. But when we talk about Hashem having us in his thought, so to speak, that's not the same. Because God thinking of us, that makes us. Just like using that example of the author thinking of the character, that makes the character. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu, dichsiv bei, ki loi machshavoi sai machshavoi seichem v'goyimre. The Holy One, blessed be He, however, of whom it is written, for my thoughts are not your thoughts. Machshavtoi v'yediyosoi, sheyedei kol hanivroim, makefes kol nivro v'nivro b'poel mamish. So His thought and knowledge of all created beings actually encompass each and every creature. Not just in theory, but actually encompass them. Sharei, he chayusoi v'isavusoi me'ayin leyesh v'poel mamish. Because God's knowledge is verily its life force and that which brings it into existence out of nothingness in actual reality. So God's thought, unlike man's thought, unlike man's, thus encompasses the actual subject of his thought, in this case, all created beings. It brings about their creation and continued existence, even though it doesn't descend to their level and become internalized within them, but remains in an exalted state. So this is one aspect of the godliness connected to the world by encompassing the world. And that is a level that only stays, it's a connection which is a general connection. But then you have the individual light and the individual energy that each and every creature receives according to its needs. Just like in a human being. We spoke about this in other lessons in Tanya, when we spoke about the energy that the soul gives to the body. You have the very general life that is equally exists in every part of the person. The brain is just as alive as the hair or the nail. They're both alive. They're both connected with life. And then there is energy that comes from the brain, from the soul, through the brain, that is individualized. There is the intellect, and there is different talents that a person has, different the emotions, and there is the physical movements, all kinds of energy that comes. Each and every organ receives a different individualized type of energy. Similarly, we have the idea that Hashem fills the world to each individual creature what it needs. That continues the Alter Rebbe to explain, and he fills the world. This is the life force that becomes enclosed, meaning it becomes internalized within the essence of the created being. It is powerfully contracted within it, כפי ערך מאוס הנברא שהוא בעל גבול ותכלס בכמוסוי וייחוסוי, דהיינו מעלוס וחשיבוסוי. According to the intrinsic nature of the created being, which is finite and limited in quantity and quality. Quality meaning its significance and importance. So you don't have the same energy in a human being like you have in a rock. It's different levels of energy that comes individualized to each creature. Since the life force must vest itself within finite created being and unite with it utterly, it must necessarily be contracted and limited according to the intrinsically finite nature of the created being. And again, the contraction is only from our perspective. It is not literal contraction, literal that Hashem removes his life, but is in every creature. And it brings an example, like the sun, for example. The sun has limits, both in quantity and in quality. It has a certain size. He quotes is a size that the Maimonides says that the sun is like 167 times the size of the earth. And then you have limits in the light of the sun. It says, an example is the sun, whose body is finite and limited quantitatively. Being approximately 167 times the size of the globe of the earth. Now, the quality and significance, namely the light of the sun, is also limited as to the extent that it can emit light. Because it cannot illuminate indefinitely since it is a created being, and therefore inherently limited. Thus, although the light of the sun illuminates at a prodigious distance, that distance is not without limit. The fact is, were the sun to be a little further from us than it is now, we would all freeze. Would it be a little closer? We would all burn. Hashem placed the sun exactly in the right place, and it has the limit amount, a limited level of light, of shining, to emit light. And the same thing is true with all created beings. Likewise, all created beings are finite and limited. Because from the earth to heaven is a journey of 500 years walking. And so on, from one heaven to another, it is a distance of 500 years. This is something comes from the Talmud. Whether it's literal or metaphoric, that's not the point. The point is that they do represent limits. Each creature represents a limited creature. It is created in a limited way, in a limited fashion. And since created beings are finite and limited, the life force which is invested in them is greatly and powerfully contracted. Because it must first undergo numerous and powerful contractions until created beings by nature, finite and limited, may be brought into existence from its power and light. Only after this process of self-limitation will the limitless life force be able to invest itself within finite created beings and become united with them, as will soon be explained. So this is the end of today's shir. The Rebbe explains the concept of Hashem filling the world, encompassing the world, which follows what we explained, that the Hashem is here in every creature, even though it does need to go through so many contractions in order for us to be able to receive the light and life and energy from Hashem. But at the same time, the contraction is not real. It's not a literal contraction that Hashem removed this light. It's only from our perspective that Hashem allows us to feel ourselves as separate entities. So this is the end of today's shir. Make sure to share it, and we shall see you, God willing, tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.